It's good enough for me. Greetings, Jogee. It is
Hello.
2/2/22. It's like a good day for the Empire calendar. I'm
Right?
always trying to like get off of it, and get more into the, oh, well, this is just a Pisces moon reflecting an Aquarius sun, and the moon is conjoined Jupiter, and that's describing my moment time. And here locally, I'm actually observing right now an incredible, beautiful scene of moon and Jupiter conjoined. And I'd rather
Nice.
say, hey, let's start then than start at your 9 p.m. on 2/2/22 or whatever. But on a day like this, let's have at it. So I recorded a class today for Tunis and the sacred geometry and the number magic of two. And yeah, I love it. Do you like to play with numbers in that way?
I used to play with numbers that way a lot more before. I do make an effort to whenever I see like 1818, or which I do all the time, to kind of like think about it and be like, huh, 1818, what is
Is
that?
that the one that shows up for you, 18?
18 and 19 show up a lot. Hmm.
The numbers of the moon and the sun
Oh, is that right?
in the tarot. Yeah, the 18 is
All
moon, the
right.
19 is sun. And
Whoa,
so
that actually
her
is
and
wow.
him, right?
And
That's
also
where I
my
want to be with you
fucking
today. Like right
yes.
now, I'm looking at Moon conjoined Jupiter, and were I to describe this, for me, it's not like, and it is conjunct it.
Yes.
I'll say she's come to meet him in the
Mhm.
sky. So, how do you feel when we say Moon is she, her? Is Moon she, he, it, they, or other?
For me personally, and I know a lot of people will disagree with that, I do like the planetary genders. I think they're really useful, um, just in how we communicate, what they represent to one another, but also just um, as in like taking away planets from this very material sort of like it's a thing in the sky to like no, it's like a living sort of thing. And I think that to have a personal pronoun kind of adds a little bit of that uh to it.
Yeah, I always have a hard time saying it. The weirdest one though is I often call sun it.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
But for me, Moon and Venus are she, her, and Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, he, him, and that, and I want to be sensitive and also allow myself to breathe. And it's a planet. Like it's so much more. Planetary consciousness is so much more than he or she.
Hmm.
But one of the places where it shows up, and this is currently more your realm than mine, is horary astrology, right? So if I
Right.
want to find my stolen bike, it's nice to know who stole it.
Hmm.
And some of the planets might just say that it was stolen by a young man, and some might say it's stolen by an old woman or something, right?
Right.
But what about the truth that now we have so many more beings on Earth who are, non-binary?
Right.
How does the chart deal with that? Is that just going to be Mercury? Or is there space, I think, for astrology to evolve, and even these like old and traditional practices like horary astrology along with them?
Right. And I think that that's like a really good thing to explore because even with horary, like if non-binary individuals do exist, then the horary chart should be able to reflect that. I don't think that the case is that like horary is limited in that binary. I think, and even like the traditional approach is limited in that binary because I don't think that's the case because the case for planetary genders and like traditional astrology is so much more complicated. It's not just like Venus is a she, but like is she like a morning star? Is she an evening star? Is she in a like a masculine sign or a feminine sign? Is she above the ground? Is she below the ground? And then all those things have that like theme of polarity embedded into it. And I think we should be using more of those qualifiers to help narrow down we're in the spectrum because I think that um, the whole idea of the spectrum is very useful, but we cannot like just embracing a spectrum without recognizing that there are two ends to that spectrum in the first place.
What side of the spectrum is that image of Venus behind you?
Oh, there's definitely Mars.
But in it is said that in some of the traditions, like in the Mesoamerican tradition, for example, Venus morning star was seen as like this kind of war god.
Right.
Right. And I mean, maybe evening star as well. Like they're looking at like Quetzalcoatl in one of the languages and Lok in another language. And it's really cool. And I mean, this is true in the Greek tongue as well, that like there's a different name for Venus as morning star and then Venus as an evening star. I mean, people look back and suggest therefore the Greeks like believe that these were different planets, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, you look at Venus and Venus on one side or the other. But the truth is, if Venus is waking up to rise before the sun, like that's a very different kind of energetic than seen at nighttime.
Right.
Maybe this talk wants to bring us to sect, or that's a thing that we plant seeds for to play with another time. But I was tripping on this the other day, how, you see Venus, who's said to be of the night sect, when the sun is in like the first as morning star, Venus above the horizon before sunrise, or when the sun is in the sixth, it's set, and now Venus is evening star. Sometimes the sun in the fifth even. And so there's something to that. But at the same time, I'm staring at Moon and Jupiter right now, and I only see Jupiter because it's nighttime too. So that like that one doesn't work so well. Anyway, I'm kind of going far afield. So when you're saying spectrum, are you describing gender spectrum?
Yes, I definitely jumped the gun there without really introducing the topic. But yeah, I am talking about a gender spectrum. Because if I guess in the horary context that we're talking about, like, yes, it could be that maybe you look at the horary and like, let's say Venus is the signifier for the person that stole the bike. And then you look at Venus and you're like, oh, immediately you're just going to think female because that's usually where people will jump to. But then are you taking all these other considerations that do still embody that sense of polarity, or are you not? And when I say you, I don't say you, but just in general.
Feel free to, because I'm wondering about for me in my own astrology. I started my study at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, which is very much like Venus is the sacred feminine or divine feminine, and Mars is the sacred masculine. And it works different for men and women. Like I've read that as well. I really like Alice O. Howell. Have you come across her yet?
No.
She's cool. She's a Jungian astrologer, and her first book was called Jungian Archetypes for Astrology, I think, where she's writing, like handwritten letters, which were then types, to a friend of hers who was also a Jungian analyst who was getting turned on to astrology, and she's just kind of laying it out from step one. And she talks about how Venus and Mars work different for women than they do for men. That was kind of how I first received Venus and Mars from a teacher when I was getting going. Alice O. Howell's second book, which is The Heavens Declare, is a really great one, by the way. I've been meaning to dig it off the shelf because I'm teaching on polarity for the School of Astrology this Sunday, and she has some really great gems in there about elements, and I imagine in regards to polarity as well. Anyway, so then I remember like my great awakening came at a music festival I was speaking at in the summer in the Northwest. I lived in Seattle for a long time. We had these wonderful festivals, the conscious festivals, and so they had space for an astrologer to come represent, and I'd play some saxophone with a band or two as well. And at one point I was giving a talk on the Venus cycle, and a talk that I was calling like the archetypal ascent of the global goddess. And in the description, there's this whole thing about the rising of the divine feminine. And this young girl was like, dude, that's not cool. And I was like, what, like a man talking about the feminine? She's like, no, like, don't like the feminine, like we're getting past that, right? And I was like, oh, like tell me about this, right? And it's like, yeah, the masculine, feminine, that thing's outdated. That's like binary, that's trapping us, that's the patriarchy. But she corrected herself because she didn't want to call it the patriarchy because that sounded like the masculine or something. It was this really interesting conversation. That same festival, by the way, a dear friend of mine who I work with all the time still, she said, stop bashing the mask, man. Because I don't know, I was like very oriented towards this, the way that I received astrology, this idea that the signs had all been kind of, oh, I don't know, claimed by the patriarchy and that we've lost their feminine nature. And I mean, I agree with that actually in many regards still, but it was like kind of this, paradigm that I had been placed in. And yeah, I really appreciated that from my friend Waters. Like, stop bashing the mask. So it was like this really interesting weekend for me where these themes of like the feminine and the masculine were challenged in interesting ways. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of just like, regurgitating here. And what do I really think about it? And then having clients come in to sit who are identifying, non-binary or kind of moving and back and forth on different sides of the spectrum. This whole like, oh, well, because you're a man, Venus is what you're going to be attracted to in a chart, or because you're a woman, Mars is what you're going to be attracted to. And like that ship had to sail. Right. And then so then it had to become like, oh, then what are they? And how do I do relating and relationship? Like if that model isn't going to work or doesn't apply everywhere, or are they also that? And right. And then it just became one of the great sources of in a sea of confusions in my astrological study and expression, right? Like that.
That actually brings a question up to me, because when we first officially met, I had a reading with you, and I think you knew already that I use he and they pronouns. Like, was that a thing that ever crossed your mind in that moment?
Well,
kind of like trying
if
to...
I had still been at that place in my astrology, it would have been one of these places where I'm just treading lightly and maybe not sharing some of the things that I'm seeing in the chart. I've now kind of moved on from that. And yeah, I mean, when I teach polarity, like those words are going to come out like hey, let's like look at this thing. What is it? Right. So are there masculine signs and feminine signs? I prefer to say diurnal and nocturnal, which is not only old, but I'm so astronomically inclined. They actually speak a little bit more to me, but not to all, especially like a lot of modern students who haven't studied sect yet. And, the truth is you're never going to have all of the nocturnal signs below the horizon and all of the diurnal signs above. So there's kind of a challenge there. And even if they were, is it daytime anyway? Right. So there, you can reach back into some of the older books and it's like the positive and the negative signs.
Right.
And if you bring that, you're like, hey, see, the masculine signs are positive and the feminine signs are negative. Like, get ready for a bunch of tomatoes to get thrown your way or whatever. And, maybe rightfully so. I mean, I think it'd be fun for us to journey into that language a little bit too. Yeah, I'm very interested in pronoun realms, especially like he, they is one thing. Like I'm just trying to understand that even just in grammar, right? And I'd love to ask you about that. I will in a second, but like the new ones, like the G and the Ju and that kind of thing, that's like, whoa, what's going on there? Like, how do I deal with that? And then it's just interesting when so many books on my shelves are speaking about that kind of alchemical, sacred union and Hieros Gaimos, and, the establishment of the king and the queen within, and then they are married in that great coming back together, and they give birth to the child, right? It said that you were born once of your mother, you can be born of spirit again and again, but that the alchemist's great work is to rebirth himself through this process. And like, where is that? So is that still alive, or does that want to go away when we're looking even at new ways of fertility? Right. I mean, not that that's going to require like actual copulation and birth, like the inner feminine masculine thing, right? But it's based upon that kind of biological birthing model, right? And so as that's shifting, does that old alchemical approach go away? Like some people won't look at that, right? Like that's that old thing that we're like growing beyond now. For some, they want to like update that and make room for it. For me, if a non-binary person steals my bike, I want my chart to tell me that. And we actually probably at this point are receiving the opportunity to engage with a great science project in astrology, right? When you find out like the person who stole my bike identifies this way, now let me go back to that horary and see how that is. So, right. And just to also, I'm saying so much, but to retrograde back to what you had to say, like if Venus shows up, well, what if it's Venus in Aries? What if it's Venus combust? What if it's Venus rising before the sun? Where it's a modern statement and an interesting one, but Dane Rujar said, regardless of the sign, if Venus rises before the sun as morning star, add a dash of archetypal Aries.
Right.
Interesting approach, So I think we are in this. We like to think that astrology was born through this like greatest trial and error science experiment of all time. I think the language personally is a little bit too vast for that. I think a lot of it was actually it being more received, right? But we are in a time now where if we have open hearts and open mind and interest and allow ourselves to be part of like this revolution and renaissance, we can engage with one of these great science experiments and witnessing. Yeah.
No, totally. I agree. And I actually have a question before there was a point that you made, or a question that you made that I wanted to go back to when I remember it. But just the other day when I was thinking about this, just to get prepared, and I was wondering because I feel like there's two sides of the coin when it comes to like the whole gender thing in a very dualistic sort of way. There are the people that do embrace the she and the he and then everything in between, and then there's the people who want to get completely rid of he and she altogether and just be like everything is just muddied and like not muddied, I guess it's not a good word, I guess just like non-specific. It's more from person to person. We're gonna get to figure out what to call each other. And that got me to think about like from a geometrical sort of aspect, because if we're talking about a spectrum, then that's more of a line, but then if we're talking about like getting rid of like the he and the she, then we're not so much talking about a spectrum anymore. We're really talking about a circle, because then we don't know where it starts. We don't know where it ends. It's just like this whole thing and it goes in a loop forever.
For students of the school, I'm like revealing something that's not supposed to be shown yet, but look at that line. It's actually a circle, and look at that circle. It's actually a line. Right. And I'll be showing this a bit in the polarity class too. Right. Like I love showing this, taking the zodiac and snipping it at one bit and taking that circle and stretching it out so it's a line. And then I can see this like, fire and air diurnal kind of above the line and earth and water below. And you get this sine wave and this image of like alternating current, and ideas of aspect theory work out so well. But of course, with the zodiac, contrary to popular modern belief, there is no beginning, there is no ending. It's a circle, right? So you got to put that thing back together. And now you have this beautiful weaving, around the circle itself. And there's like inner and outer. And that's actually for me, because I'm I'm self-initiating on a path of sacred geometry in addition to the astrology, like inform my astrology. That inner and outer image for the polarities actually works better for me than anything else. But the way that I know those terms, or I'm learning those terms, it doesn't necessarily apply to like normal language, I guess. I have a hard time expressing what I'm experiencing there, right? So they're not the words that I use exoterically, I guess. So, well, let's talk about like the grammar thing because this is tricky, right? I
Yeah.
remember like because I was contemplating after you and I spoke about he, they. We didn't speak about it much besides like, yeah, that's what I do. And I was like, cool. I want to say they when I refer to you.
Mhm.
And when I'm training, by the way, what I say is, oh, when I'm talking about you, as I love to, because you have these many skills, and I love to talk about
Oh,
that. It's like
thanks.
Joe and Joe does, and Joe does, and I'll just say Joe 50 times in a sentence because I'm inclined towards he and I want to say
Mhm.
they. And so I just like Joe, and also like before I might know a pronoun in a crowd now, but I hear a name or something, right? Then
Mhm.
I'll just use that name again and again. It just kind of feels like the safe play. It's actually, I was just talking to my niece, my youngest niece, the other day, who's, oh gosh, 13. Anyway, she has a classmate who is like very much moving back and forth in different places of the spectrum. And
Mhm.
so my niece is challenged because she really wants to support that and honor. But if she uses the pronoun that was right yesterday, it might be wrong today. And then she
Right.
gets chastised for it. And so her peer is wearing like a bracelet, and depending on what color bracelet or what side of the arm it's wearing, like that teaches you or something. And I
Mhm.
mean, I love games, right? So I like that, and I like games with changing rules in these. Like I think that's really beautiful, but that's also super challenging to the uninitiated, especially like when I speak with you, like you're like I'm also not even worried about it. Like do
Mhm.
what you're gonna do, which I respect. But I remember having this very simple revelation where I wasn't speaking about you or anyone particular. Or I guess I was. I was speaking about an individual, and I said, "Yeah, they're really good at running or something." And I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, they like that worked grammatically right there." Right. So I'm not like cheating the English language.
Mhm.
I just need to find those places and like learn with what I know already and then recorrect the spaces where it's not in the flow. Um,
Right.
I want to ask you this because I imagine Portuguese is your first language, right?
Um, sorta. It's the one that I spoke first, but it's definitely not the one I'm more proficient at speaking.
Oh, there's a fun like there's a fun vocabulary thing or homonym, right? Because first either means what you learn first, or does it mean which one's like up top of your current consciousness? Interesting. And hadn't thought about it. I was actually thinking that it would have been the language that you learned first since you were born in
Mhm.
Brazil. And I also imagine, though I don't know Portuguese, that it's very similar to Spanish or like,
Yeah.
gosh, it seems like most languages where there's masculine and feminine words.
Yes. Mhm.
And there's also they words, right? Like in Spanish, like usted, and there's the whole conjugation for they.
Mhm.
So I was just thinking about this yesterday. Like it feels like it would still work, but are those languages going to have even more difficulty opening to like new spaces within the gender spectrum and
Right.
non-binary intention?
I think so, but I think not just because of language, for many other reasons as well. Which I'm not well versed enough to like make an intelligent comment. So I'm just gonna leave it
You
at that.
mean grammatical reasons or cultural reasons?
Cultural reasons,
Oh, right.
like more so than grammatical reasons, even, I think.
Yeah, and that's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really, for me, I've embraced this opportunity or invitation or challenge to recreate my astrology.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's happening to me all the time. And a lot of that's just through working, like being with the sky and learning a thing from the sky. And that's changing my very cosmology at the heart of astrology. Right. And those are always simple things where it's like, oh, and it might confirm something I was taught but denied because why?
Right.
or it might feel like something new. And then like I'm drawing circles and it's confirmed at the launch pad of sacred geometry, or the musical map that you and I are working with, like that might inform it, right?
Mhm.
And it's always, for me, it's like when I feel like I'm getting good in astrology, and not necessarily cocky about it, I was like, wow, this is really working. Then I get the whole like rug pulled out. And I gotta go
But
back
that's how
to
you get
school.
better. That's the whole
That's how you get
process.
better. And I always say, and I do mean it most of the time, I hope I can look back at my astrology from 6 years from now and think, yeah, I knew a thing or two, and that like that's okay given what I
Mhm.
knew. But right, because we want to always grow. And
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of that will be just also in my approach with clients. That's like a whole different thing. But like this was perhaps, oh, I can't say that. I was about to say it was probably the time where it was more like an outside influence in a human body that came to challenge my current astrology that required a revamp. But
Mhm.
that's happened before too, especially with clients like who know a thing about their chart that I don't know how to see, and I need to find out, and then that realigns everything, right? But
Right.
this is a huge one. I mean, I can't tell you how often I'm listening to an astrologer and I'm hearing the divine feminine like 22 times in a minute,
Right.
right? Or the sacred masculine, the masculines. And it's just like, wow, there's a lot of people who are just going to turn that off right now, or at least be turned off to it, or feel that it doesn't necessarily apply. Obviously, there's a lot of people who are moving around in the gender spectrum who are still completely interested. And if you want to be a student of traditional astrology, again, it's going to be difficult for us to go like erase all those words that were written and
Right.
replace them, and
And
should
even
we?
just like reading ancient books and how they're all written for men. Like they're never woman in any delineation. Only if it's bad. Uh, but that's a whole other thing. And I think that I don't know, for me, they're just simplifiers at the end of the day. And I think it's less about like actually getting rid of the word or changing the word, and more about changing the understanding of what that word means. It's really just simplifying something that is ineffable. Like we're saying, like the whole circle. Like we cannot understand like where the circle begins because it just really doesn't have a beginning. So we simplify it to a line so we can somehow understand how maybe it starts here, maybe it ends there. And what those two words at the end of the spectrum are really doesn't matter, in my opinion, at least. But they're simplifying the whole structure that's much more complicated.
But does it start on one side and end on the other side, or is it, as I was shown the number line in school, this zero in the middle, and so half of it's negative,
Right.
half of it's positive, right? I mean, that's interesting in the astrological language too, like the idea of like, a sinister versus a dexter aspect as
Mm-hmm.
left-handed and right-handed, and that kind of trip. There's a really great oh, rap by Robert Lawler, who wrote one of the cooler sacred geometry texts that's called Sacred Geometry in Theory and Practice by Robert
Mm-hmm.
Lawler. Highly recommended if anyone's hearing this. That has interested in that side of our craft. And he speaks in the just kind of prelude about, imagine what happened when the zero came creeping onto the scene.
Right.
Because the zero, is a rather new being
Mm-hmm.
in Western consciousness. And we see like the Maya were playing it with it too, but that was pretty late in the game. And like, Roman numerals, thank golly that we've kind of gotten past that thing, because you got to do a lot of chiseling to write 152 or whatever. It's not, like it's the quote unquote Arabic number system is a nice thing to have. And the zero is a super convenient tool, but it really started to dominate because, well, it's great for bankers. And once the zero comes creeping to the beginning, like if you look down at your keyboard right now, what does it do? It's like 1 2 3 4
Mm-hmm.
5 6 7 8 9 0, because of course everything begins with oneness, with the one.
Right.
And so this like new thing came in, and you just stick it at the end because sometimes it's convenient, but it has marched all the way back to the beginning of the number line. So now we begin with nothing. And it used to balance when 1 was the beginning, you balance 3 with 1/3.
Right.
Right. So you either have 3 times as much, right? Or, 1/3 as much. So 1 is 3 times as much as 1/3. And it's like productive, it's products.
Mhm.
Where now you balance 3 if 0 is, the central point with -3. And so what's more productive, like products or sums, is the question I always ask in this part of this trip. And like negative feels bad and positive feels good. Like that's how we use those words, right?
And that's the same thing with like the whole malefic and benefic thing. I think that we have to be comfortable with negative not being negative or not being bad.
Right. Well, that's especially given that Mars is there behind you with a golden spear and a skull with a crowd of hyenas observing the spear, right? So that feels kind of malefic. Or
That's true.
mean, unless you need someone to put an arrow through a skull head. Yeah, I think that's a really important journey. It's difficult for the modern healer consciousness, and which is maybe a stretch, but the modern astrology student, right? Someone who's interested in feeling, healing, knowing, and growing, as I like to say. Like that's usually the impulse to get back into, oh, this is good and this is bad, because that's benefic and this is malefic, and this is the greater benefic and this is the lesser malefic. Right. And those words are really tricky. I mean, you look at some of the astronomical words. This is inferior. This is superior. Right. And so, I have teachers who won't use those words because it's just patriarchal. But inferior means below and superior means
right.
So in that place, I think we really need to explore the language and make sure we're not throwing something out because we don't like how it tastes in our mouth these days. Right, because of modern usage. Now, however, malefic and benefic, it seems pretty clear
that is true.
These are the bad guys and these are the good guys. And when we read the ancient astrologers, right, it's like, oh, if a malefic is bona fide, it's going to be less bad. If a benefic is bona fide, it's even gooder, right? Sorry to use that word like that.
No, it's all good.
But yeah, so that's like a really intriguing thing. I personally require a cosmology and therefore an astrology that can help me deal with the gnarly things that happen in this world. And that kind of traditional context of malefics and all sorts of other things can help in that. But is Mars always bad?
What's that?
But is Mars always bad? Is Jupiter always good? Like I'm looking at Moon and Jupiter. It feels good to me. But actually, there was this one week I had where I looked up, I was like teaching some astrology thing, and then the sun set and I brought them out to the stars. And I was like, check out Mars. And it's like, wait, that can't be Mars. Like, what? And Jupiter was dark red for like 4 days of my life. And people I was next to, I was like, wait, what color is that? I was stopping people on the street. It's like, hey, excuse me, but you see that really bright star in the sky? Like, what color is that? And they're like white, like blue, white. I was like, what is going on here? I had just kind of talked trash about Jupiter in this like Facebook Live thing some days before. And I felt like Jupiter was angry. And it's like, oh, well, why is red the color of anger? And you go, because of Mars,
right?
Or maybe stoplights, but maybe stoplights are that color because of Mars. It's interesting. I drew a tarot card today and was reading a bit about the red dress the woman on the card was wearing, and it was written that that's like the color of action. It's like Mars, right? Which doesn't really comply with a red stoplight.
And then there's that whole thing too with like that they always talk about colors in like marketing. especially with like McDonald's when they talk about it, how red is the color of hunger, and that's why like many restaurants will have red in their logos. And
why is
Mars is
red
also the planet
hunger?
of hunger.
Because we like get angry when we're hungry, right? And
Mhm.
like red is
And we
that.
have to hunt to actually satiate that feeling too, right?
So blood.
Hmm.
Yeah. Or at least berries if that's how you roll.
That's true.
Uh, yeah. So, and in that level, like if you have to hunt, Mars is your best friend, right? Because you're going to need those kinds of skills.
Now, if you're being hunted on the other end, Mars is not your friend at all.
Well, not if Mars is hunting you, but you better call upon the Mars in your legs to run fast.
That's true. That is true.
Right? And well, this is a fun way that we've meandered ourselves to hunter gatherer, right?
Right.
Or have you heard this expression of like spotlight versus floodlight consciousness?
No.
So the hunter is focused in on one thing, right? Like I watched the cat, he's awesome. And he's just groundhogging out there, you know, and he will freeze frame it for like, I mean, the guy's a miracle and he leaps when it's time and he doesn't always succeed. Well, not usually, but I really respect his game. He's so devoted to it. He's trying to teach the dog it's going to be a bit, but you know, just that stillness, that focus. He's not looking anywhere. They could land a UFO on the mountain over here and he's going to be groundhogging, you know what I mean? So that like laser beam, that's the spotlight as well, right? So the room is dark, you shine the spotlight, you only see the one thing. The floodlight consciousness is more the hunter or the gatherer consciousness. Because with the gatherer consciousness, you know, you want to be able to see all the berries on the bushes, for example. And if you're only focused here, you might not see that there's ripers ones on that side,
Right.
and that kind of thing. And if you're hunting, you got a spear in your hand, so you're a little less worried about your periphery, right? When you're gathering, who knows, like if there's raiders coming through, right? So, I mean, this is something that's often applied to the masculine and the feminine. Right. So the floodlight consciousness, you light up the whole room and we see everything, but nothing has that just intense focus. And there's purpose for that. You know, it's an interesting truth is that the female eye can see better at night.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah.
I know about the colors, that they can see more colors.
Has more rods. And I don't think that's universal, right? But generally speaking, and I'm also way outside of my field, even sharing that. So this would be nice if we had somebody who could like vet that and say more.
Right.
But I've read that, and like that's an interesting thing to consider. So one thing I'm very fascinated in is polarity, which seems to be part of matter in an embodied experience. Like it seems to just be part of the trip. Like you can't have up without down. You can't have in without out. You can't have movement without something to move on.
Sometimes though, you do have things in nature that are kind of like in between.
So give me an example or five.
Like worms or like some like animals that reproduce asexually as well. Like and some animals too, I think like some type of fish, I don't know, again, also out of my expertise, but like certain fish also have like both female and male genitalia. So it's just free game. Everyone is just fucking and having a good time. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
You certainly are. But, you know, is a worm really having a good time in its self replications? But you know what's interesting is that came after I was talking about in and out and up and down and movement and static. Like I didn't say man and a woman. So
no, but I'm saying like some in nature, there's also things that are like both in and out. And I think that's why we also have Mercury as a planet in astrology that sort of like embodies that as the archetype of in and out, diurnal, nocturnal. It's like the one thing that we have that really has that as its like primary sort of like symbolism.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've tried, by the way, playing like Mercury sect rules and applying them to all the
Hmm.
planets and seeing
Right.
if it works. It's a long exercise and I haven't done enough of it, but I think it's an interesting thing. I love that morning star puts you on one side and evening star
Hmm.
puts you on the other side. I'm just such a fan of visibility. Yeah, I mean, a question is masculine, feminine a natural polarity? Right. So is man woman a natural polarity? That's like a different question in my book at this point.
Right.
Right. Like up, down, like that's a clear natural polarity. And
There's also middle,
typically,
even with up and down. There's also a middle of the point that you can decide on.
right. And you can be right. Like if the ceiling is up and the floor is down, I can like lower my chair and I'm closer to the down, or I can
Hmm.
stand up and I'm closer to the up, and that, right. So there's this always a spectrum as well.
Hmm.
Right. But are there two ends? That's like the polarity thing. Is that a necessity? I mean, then getting into triplicity and quadruplicity as astrology like
Right.
invites us to, or even challenges us to. It's really interesting. Like, where did all that come from? I look forward to exploring that with you. But yeah, this is kind of where I'm sitting and preparing for this class. It would have been a lot easier for me to just teach 5 years ago. I could have just regurgitated what I learned. And really what is, I don't know, I won't say solidified anymore, but parroted. It's like every book, it's just like the same thing, right? And now the modern books and the modern teachings, it's really fun to see those of us who have become uncomfortable with what we thought we knew and having the opportunity to reform. And that just requires listening, right?
Hmm.
Um, so we're kind of close to time. This has been the way with us, and folks who enjoy listening will come to expect it, and will be the types who enjoy somewhat meandering, you know, conversations that don't necessarily have an end or an answer. For
It's all
me,
about circles.
circles, and the answer to the question you asked should bring you back to the question, you know? And I'm very interested in the questions that can only be answered by greater questions, really.
Hmm.
Like it'd be interesting to bring Vedius Valens to this time now
Right.
and give him a year or two and or see what goes down and see what
Oh,
kind
I
of
would
language
love
comes
that.
out.
But I
Like
think
that's the
that
kind of
that's
project
now
I'm
our
interested
job.
in.
If we, because we cannot just pull him out. Well, maybe not now, but who knows in the future. But um, we can't bring him here, but we can kind of take his work and try to implement uh, with modern astrology as much as we can and try to play with those ideas. Because at the end of the day, they were just ideas. And the ideas of today are also just ideas that can create more ideas. And then we can keep bettering astrology, I guess.
I agree. Yeah, I think that any teacher that we're receiving information from, we like we should vet it through our own experience. We should see if it works
Hmm.
for us, and we should update it if it doesn't, or maybe even completely trash it. And
Right.
it's interesting to see Vedius Found's a great example. Like for some astrology students who are inclined towards the traditional, it's like Vedius Valens is a god,
Right.
and what he says goes. And so you're like, oh, why is that? Because Valens said. And look at these example charts, and you look at the example charts, and you're like, ah, I mean, I see it. Like that's not some screaming case. And typically the example charts were somebody you don't know anyway,
Mm.
right? And you're just taking like this the book's word for it. Yeah, I'm not saying that's wrong. And I mean, I'm very much an antiquarian, and I feel like whoever built the pyramids knows a lot more than whoever's building the iPhone. Um,
Hmm.
but regardless, it's an interesting thing to see and to kind of update that and test it and see if it works. Right. So, I
Right.
mean, it's hard to get your bike stolen every day to like, get it back with a horary chart. and update it. But these are things that we should be doing as students, and that's how, and that's how we will grow astrology.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that and get just too far from the trunk of the tree, right? But that's the wish to serve astrology as an agent of her evolution. I think that matters.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to, we're like at time, but I would just love to open my ears and hear anything that you would feel like sharing about he, they. Like, how did that come in for you? And why do you lean that way?
For me, I have the privilege of like not caring. Like I know that some people, to them, like gender is like a big deal. But for me, it's just like not. And I like they because it is like very much just like in this nebulous place. I don't have to like justify and I don't have to be like there's no expectation of what the they is supposed to be. Like if you're a man, then there's like all sorts of expectations that come from like way back when. But now they, it's just like there are no expectations. You're just Joe, and that's a thing that I like that you do very much. I would rather someone use my name than use like he or they even, because at the end of the day, I'm Joe.
Yeah, they's this kind of interestingly tricky one. I was talking, my sister the other day was talking to a patient. She's a doctor, and her patient's child had contracted COVID. She had some immune deficiency issues, and Hillary was really saying, hey, they should be quarantining right away. Like, where are they? And the woman's like, oh, they're in the bathroom. And so my sister's like, oh no, like she shouldn't be in the bathroom with other people. And she's like, no, they is one person. It's like, oh, okay. Like,
right.
So there can be some really significant challenges just in that communication. I think it opens up wonderful windows of the opportunity for a language to evolve. But I'm also afraid that it could go the other way, right?
Right.
The more important reflection here is like, there's a really cool reason you just shared, which is it helps you escape gender expectation. Right. That little boys get footballs shoved into their crib and dolls for the girls or whatever. I mean, we're getting past that. And I mean, sometimes there's now the reaction and going the other way with that, whatever. We want to like let the child determine the toy, right? But how long will it be before we have expectations for they?
That's true. That is a good question to ask. I don't have an answer for it.
Because this scene, I mean, it's new. It's amazing. It's like there is a new type of consciousness that's coming. I mean, I can also look at a lot of the media and even like legal things and wonder, like, it seems to be pushed on some levels. And that's an intriguing thing to do. Like, as a card carrying Scorpio and intrigued by, the forces of potential manipulation and whatever, I'm always interested to see how collective consciousness and current consciousness is being steered by, I'll just say, wizards. But there's no doubt, like, I have had really interesting conversations. It's like the conversations in which I'm learning most rapidly as a counseling astrologer, because it's something I know the least about. I mean, I tend to like, I'm pretty monogamous as well. So especially when I was living in Seattle with an amazing community of so many people who are in like open relationships, and which has like a huge spectrum of language and new verbs and new nouns. And I'm just like, what is that? It's like, oh, right. So we're allowed to like have sex with people, but not love people, or we're allowed to love people, but not have sex with people. It's like, whoa, that's interesting. There's a totally two very different models. And so that's been the other place for me where I've really been challenged and to also learn something about myself. It's like kind of far afield at this point, but because yeah, I'm just going to share it because I hate starting a sentence and not finishing it. But the flat earth folks have been really helpful for me because they helped me understand that I'm religious.
Right.
Because a lot of the things about the ball earth, reality, are because I played with globes when I was a kid in school, and because I saw pictures that are, from NASA, not things I've seen with my own eyes. Now, I am astronomically educated enough through my own experience to understand clearly that the shape of the earth is generally round, like the sky works the way the earth has to. But it was really helpful for me to face that change, because when I look out the window, this thing's pretty flat. And I realized that, like, not only am I religious because I have this whole set of like this belief system that wasn't gained through my experience, but rather just through, what I was told. And that I'm like a priest of that religion, because I'm always talking about spinning earths. You know what I mean? It's like, oh God,
Right.
like I'm suddenly, it was like a shock. I'm religious and I'm a priest, right? And then, there's other challenges like, oh my gosh, like I'm privileged and I'm blinded by that in ways where I can't really even hear necessarily what somebody's saying unless I take a look. Like there's so many times now, and it's always been this way, where in a session, I'm watching the client and I'm watching myself simultaneously. Right. And I'm learning so incredibly quickly. I have, this is a conversation I know you and I mean to have, but my steersman's in Libra. And I feel like that's going to say part of my path is going to be through relationship. That's not necessarily, me and my intimate relationships, or like some of the greatest, most amazing relationships I have, even if it's just the honor of sitting with someone one time and tuning into the sacred song of their chart with them, that ability to be educated, by sitting with another, especially one who's diving deep and willing to share and reflect upon how, these delineations of their chart have expressed in life or not. It's so profound. It's such an honor to wear like the starry cloak and serve in that way, because it's this like rapid education if we allow ourselves to have ears and not only mouths, and interest in, new paradigms, and not only, what was written, whether it was written 2,000 years ago or 30 years ago. So this has been a place like the open relationships, the gender spectrum, the new words involved in each, challenges around like privilege and lack of awareness in that regard. And interestingly, and that's why I hesitate to say it because it's a very different thing, like flat earthers have really challenged me in recent years. And it hurts, right, to be challenged in many ways, especially when you need to give up on something that you thought was true or that was working for you. But it's the best ever. So, and still, right, like I've become afraid of teaching polarity in a good way, but also like we need to, when we're presenting information, especially in teaching, I'm a huge fan of questioning the information I teach while I'm teaching. I think that's okay. But you also need to come through with a current of like, this is what it is, and this is why I believe that, and I'm happy for that to be challenged or whatever. Anyway, I learn a ton when I get to share and receive story with you, Starry Story. I'm really glad we're up to this thing.
Yeah, man. It's a great time.
You have anything else you want to throw in?
Not really. Nothing, no deep insights or anything like that. Yeah.
There's one thing I do want to say, because there'll be a lot of folks hearing this that aren't in the school of astrology, where I'll certainly be saying it there. The whole positive and negative thing, I think it's something that we also want to reframe. Because you could go back and just like, memory hole those books that might call Aries a positive sign and Taurus a negative sign.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've ever wired a panel, like
Right.
negative is your friend. It's the hot wire that will shock your ass and maybe kill you, right? Why is the negative your friend? Because it is literally grounded, right, through earth, like metal, into the body of the earth and into the
Right.
water currents that run throughout our planet. So when, as we do these days, look at water and earth signs of that, chalice kind of downward energy, call it yin or feminine or whatever, we really hesitate to call it negative because it just sounds so patriarchal of like, oh,
Right.
masculine good, feminine bad. Like, I don't even like using the masculine feminine anymore because it doesn't work. It doesn't land in many ears, right? So what are the words that do work? I'm currently like, I like diurnal, daylight, nocturnal, night. Like, I really like outer and inner for these kind of geometrical reasons, but I still feel like they don't get across correctly. But anyway, just to say that thing about positive and negative, if we allow ourselves not to receive the language only through the filters of our like reaction in our charge and our need to change a world that has gone way out of alignment, then it might just be that those words have something to say, right?
And this is something that I actually covered a lot on this. I was a guest at the Hotline Astrology podcast, the episode that just came out today, actually. And we're talking about all the planets, and we just got to like, I think we started at Mars or like maybe Mercury. I don't know. But one of the things that doesn't really matter. One of the things that we talked about a lot is that even with like malefics and benefics is that benefics are good, but who are they good for? And malefics can be bad, but like who are they bad for? Sometimes you want a malefic to be bad to your obstacle or to your enemy because that really is a good thing. But then sometimes a good thing that happens to a person, let's say, I guess we're going with the Hitler chart, I guess. But we have like a super evil person that wants to conquer the world and kill everybody. The most benefic experience for them would be for them to actually be able to do it and conquer the world and succeed.
Oh, interesting. So Jupiter could work in that super evil way for a super evil person because they are like the benefic. It doesn't mean that because that person is somebody I would describe as malefic, that the malefics kind of become their benefics.
Right.
Fascinating. Right. Well, let's bring it back to just anyone out of the super evil domain. Yeah, if you don't have Mars in your realm, you're not going to do too well. Because if you can't cut when things don't work, right, you're going to be trampled on.
Yeah, we use this, sorry to cut you off, but we use this example that's actually really good. But there's this really rare condition where you're just unable to feel pain. And this lady had it. And she would very often break bones and just be absolutely ill because she couldn't feel it. So like her leg would be broken for weeks and she wouldn't notice it. And then it would just get worse and worse and worse. And I think that like the malefics are really that like really big thing that just tells you like, no, that's not it, chief.
Right. Oh, that leg's
not
broken.
the thing.
Yeah, and that feels like Saturn to me, right? So if we don't have Saturn, like we're not here on this earth. And without those boundaries and those structures and those foundations, it's also not going to work. We really need these beings balanced. I mean, so often when we're sitting with clients, it's like, wow, you need some more Mars. You can't express your anger and it's just, boiling over inside and you don't even know it, right? That's that kind of you're walking around on a broken leg thing, just not your leg. And not enough Saturn, right? So I mean, Saturn's great at the things that we need Saturn for.
Mm-hmm.
And obstacles are sometimes your greatest friend.
Right.
Right. It's just like you're saying, it's how we use them. So yeah, I mean, this is opening and planting seeds for a much longer talk. I'm excited to hear that podcast too. So say the name again about it.
Oh yeah, so the astrology hotline. I don't know the episode number. It'll say Jogee.
Yeah. Well, it's the
You'll know.
second or third one you've done with him now, because this is a series.
That is the second, yeah.
Got it.
This is part 2 because we actually recorded everything in one go. It was a 5-hour long podcast. We went through
Nice.
all the planets. But in true Mercury retrograde style, half of the recording was corrupted, so we had to re-record the second half, which was nice actually. It turned out better than the first. Yeah, and we talked about planets. We kind of brushed a bit into outer planets. We kept that separate, but still something that I'm not confident enough talking about because I just don't really know how they work and what they do. Just like watching it. So the day that I watch and I see how they work, I'll talk more about them.
Fun about them is, and I'm not saying like for plenty of folks, like if Venus is he or Venus is they or Venus is it, like do what you do, right? I always try to say that, like, look, I know Venus, I'm looking at moon right now, just setting into the mountain right now. It's like she is setting. Mm-hmm. Because when I project like the way that I connect to people here on Earth, it's a vehicle in my kind of immature state in consciousness to utilize to better connect intimately to this being here who is one of my greatest teachers, right? And I know moon is that kind of like motherly force, but not always. But typically, and that's how I speak, but I always try to say, I was trying to remember at the beginning, like, hey, I'm going to be saying he and she, and I really hope that doesn't like offend you, or please don't have me, don't receive this like I'm trying to suggest how you should be connecting or calling or whatever. Like that's a very personal thing in my opinion. And I bet you that there are plenty of beings who would prefer to be called he by some of their relations and she by others of their relations. And I bet you moon's just like that. And moon would rather be they or moon be it. Anyway, where I'm coming with is you can't turn back to the old pages and see if Uranus represents a man or a woman, or Neptune or Pluto. Now they happen to be named for, and so much of what folks are doing with these newly discovered astronomical beings is so dependent upon the myths around the name that some astronomer gave, which in and of itself is a brilliant thing to explore. Right. But you're less shackled by the chains of history in regards to like gender freedom with Uranus.
Right.
And then Uranus can like help you bring that back. But as you said before, like Mercury can do this, the moon as well. Right. When the moon is, as she is right now, growing, that's said to be more like that yang thing. Right. And that's going to, as you know, like in the so-called accidental dignities, like in a day chart, you want the moon growing.
Right.
And in a night chart, you want the moon shrinking because one's diurnal and one's night-ish. Right. And yeah, so I love that too, because the more we learn in the rules of astrology, the more you actually see the simple rules are not enough. There's so much variability and versatility. And I think that any spectrum and my current experience, like the gender spectrum and the challenges of like listening and trying to learn and just the confusions that I have personally, right? Like that is such a great invitation to also release what I think I know about anything. And astrology, of course, is this thing that I want to know the most about, right? So, well, here we are. All right, Jogee. Thanks again. It's always wonderful, my friend.
Well, thank you for having me.
Right on. I'm excited to see who shows up behind you next time we explore, which
It's
will
probably
likely
gonna be Mars for the next 2 months.
Yeah, that's what's happening for you, huh?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, well, Mars and Capricorn should help us out. I'm in a Cancer month of I have Cancer Mars of an Aries year.
All right.
So that Capricorn Mars opposition to my natal Mars, like that's a thing. And
Yeah.
maybe this conversation lives there. I can go consider that. Yeah, it feels like when we get back together to do this thing again, probably in a few weeks, elements might be kind of a natural place to go with it. I mean, there's so much that I'm excited to explore with you. So we will see, but it will just consistently be a tour of the astrological known and especially unknown. Here's to that.
I wish I still had tea. I'd drink it all.
That's all right. I'll drink one for you right now. And
you really got me into this tea that I don't know how to say the name. You mentioned it in one class, and then I bought 2 bags full of it, and it doesn't last me a week.
Fantastic. Puer?
Yes, that.
Oh, played.
Puer, yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to send some teapots out to you, so let's talk about that in a bit.
Nice.
All right. Well, everyone who's tuning in, we would love, of course, to hear your comments. And surprise, we haven't really kind of set an official schedule. And so this thing just goes live. Maybe you're tuned in right now in real time. Maybe you're tuning in from what I currently perceive to be the future, but what do I know? Regardless, we would love to hear from you. What do you think? Is there anything we said that you completely disagree with, or that you do agree with, or that you can offer more information, or that you can expand upon? Help us learn. Let's do this thing together. And if you like this, please like it and share it around with whoever you might feel would also be interested in this kind of StarryTelling journey. All right.
Maybe also a good idea to send your element questions, since we know we're talking about elements next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. What do you want to know about the ether? Ooh. Oh man, I wish that dodecahedron I just constructed, it's out there. I wish I could have just picked that. Look, this is a dodecahedron, the shape of the universe. All right, let's go play in that realm soon. Jogee, thanks again, my friend. Thanks anyone else out here for tuning in. Hope to see you on Earth someday. And until then, we will see you in space.